All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving deep into the world of language and thought and how they all connect with communication.
Oh, yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
It really is. And we're tackling those big questions that have probably crossed your mind at some point, like, does the language we speak actually shape the way we think?
hmm
Or is it just, a tool that we use to express thoughts we already have?
Exactly.
And we're going to try to untangle all of this with this paper by Fedorenko, Pianedossi, and Gibson. And
It really challenges some conventional thinking on this topic.
it does, yeah. It throws a bit of a wrench in some classic assumptions, for sure.
Well, one of the things that I found really interesting, and it's a great starting point, I think, is that scientists have actually been able to pinpoint a specific network in the brain
Oh, wow.
that's dedicated to processing
So
language.
there's like a language zone in our heads.
Pretty much. And what's interesting is it's not just about the sounds that we make when we speak. This network, it activates whether we're reading, writing, speaking, or even signing. So it seems to be dealing with the underlying structure of language, not just the sounds.
So it's like it's processing the meaning and the grammar, like the rules of language, and not just the physical act of producing words.
Exactly. That's what suggests it's doing something more abstract.
Right.
Now, the big debate, and it's been raging for a long time, is whether this language network is actually the foundation of thought, like you need it to think complex thoughts, or if it's more of a tool to just communicate thoughts that we already have.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. So, like, is language the engine of thought, or is it just the vehicle for it?
Yeah, I like that analogy. And the research that we're going to be diving into today really suggests that maybe language isn't as essential for thought as we once believed.
Interesting. So what makes them question that whole language equals thought idea?
So, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence they talk about comes from studying individuals with aphasia. And aphasia is a condition where people have severe difficulty with language.
I see.
They may struggle to find the right words, or understand what other people are saying, or put together grammatically correct sentences.
I imagine that would be incredibly challenging to deal with.
It is, but here's the really surprising thing. Even with these difficulties with language,
Yeah.
a lot of people with aphasia demonstrate perfectly intact abilities in other areas like math, logic, things like planning, and even understanding other people's intentions.
Wow. So they can still think these complex thoughts, even if they can't express them through language very easily.
Exactly. And that throws a wrench into the idea that language is absolutely essential for complex thought. Like, it suggests that there's other stuff going on in the brain
Right. Other systems at play.
that allow us to think and reason without having to rely heavily on that language network.
I mean, that makes sense. It's like there's different ways to get to a destination. You can get to complex thought, even if that one road, the language road, is blocked.
That's a great way to put it. And brain imaging studies kind of back this up.
Oh, really?
When researchers use techniques like fMRI to look at what's happening in the brain while people are doing all kinds of different thinking tasks, but tasks that don't involve language,
Okay.
the language network stays pretty quiet.
Huh.
But other areas of the brain, they light up, showing that different networks are handling thinking and language.
So is it wrong to think of the brain as like one big blob? Should we think of it more as different, like specialized departments working together?
Yeah, that's a much better way to think about it. And another piece of the puzzle comes from looking at deaf children who, for one reason or another, haven't been exposed to sign language early in life.
Oh, interesting.
And even without that full access to language,
Yeah.
these children develop complex reasoning skills.
Wow. So even without language, the brain still finds ways to learn and problem solve.
Absolutely. It seems to challenge the idea that language is like the sole foundation for cognitive development. It suggests that our brains are adaptable and that they can find different pathways to develop the thinking skills.
I mean, that's remarkable. So it sounds like there's a growing body of evidence that maybe language isn't the king of thought that we used to believe it to be.
Right?
So if it's not all about thought, then what is its primary function?
Well, the research we're looking at seems to point towards language being a really efficient system for communication.
Okay, I'm all about efficiency. So tell me more about that.
Well, for example, think about the sounds of language.
Okay.
The way that we organize sounds is designed for clarity and ease of transmission.
Okay.
It's like our languages have figured out ways to space out sounds so that they're easy to understand, even in a noisy environment.
That's so true. I mean, we can
Yeah.
follow a conversation even when there's music playing or other
Yeah.
people are talking nearby.
Exactly. Our languages have evolved to be incredibly robust.
Yeah.
And it's not just sounds, it's word choice, too. We tend to use shorter, simpler words for things that we say all the time to save effort.
Right.
Like, think about common words like the, a is and. Those are short and sweet and get straight to the point.
Yeah. Our brains love those shortcuts.
Absolutely. And then there's grammar.
Right.
All those rules about how we structure sentences, that's all about making sure we can convey the most information as clearly as possible.
I see.
So languages have this amazing ability to balance complexity with efficiency.
It's like finding that sweet spot where you say enough to get your point across,
Yeah,
but without making things too complicated.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you see that balance when you look at how languages deal with the connections between words in a sentence.
What do you mean by connections?
Okay, so if we have a sentence like the dog barked,
Right.
the words dog and bark, they're linked. They need each other to make sense.
Yeah.
And languages tend to keep these connected words close together for clarity.
Right.
Like, imagine if we said, the dog with wagging tail and floppy ears outside in the bright sunshine barked loudly.
Woof. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's much harder to follow, right?
Yeah, my brain's already tired.
Yeah, exactly. Our brains like those nice, tight connections between related words.
Makes sense.
And this drive for efficiency, you can even see it in the way that languages decide to assign meaning to words.
Okay, now we're getting a bit abstract for me. Can you give me an example?
Sure. So think about family terms,
Okay.
like mother, father, aunt, uncle.
Mhm.
Some languages have very specific terms for each relative, while others use broader terms that can cover multiple relationships. Like in some cultures, your mom's sister and your dad's sister might both be called aunt,
Yeah.
while in other cultures, they would have completely distinct names.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's like choosing between a super detailed map
Okay.
that shows you every little thing or one that just shows you the major roads.
Right. Like the detailed one gives you more information, but it can also be a bit overwhelming.
Exactly. Languages have to strike this balance between being informative without becoming too complex to learn and use.
Yeah, totally.
So it really does seem like our languages have evolved to be these, finely tuned machines for communication.
Yeah.
And that kind of fits into a larger theory about human evolution.
Okay.
It's called the continuity view.
Continuity view. I like the sound of that, but what exactly does that mean?
So basically, it suggests that human language, even though it's so complex,
Right.
it didn't just appear out of thin air.
Yeah.
It probably evolved gradually, building on mental abilities and brain structures that were already present, like way back in our ancestors.
Oh, so instead of language being this huge leap forward,
Right.
it was more like a slow and steady kind of building on what was already there.
Exactly, refining and expanding those systems over time.
So it's kind of like how our bodies have evolved over millions of years,
Yeah.
adapting to the environment. It's saying our cognitive abilities, including language, have a similar story.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. Now, you mentioned earlier that our brains have gotten a serious upgrade over evolutionary time.
Yeah.
Especially the parts responsible for higher level thinking. Can you remind me about that?
Oh, yeah. So we're talking about the association cortex.
Right.
And that's the part of the brain that deals with things like planning, decision-making,
Mm.
abstract thought, all that good stuff.
Okay.
And in humans, that area is proportionally way bigger than it is in other primates.
So, we got a major software update at some point.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And this expansion in the association cortex led to more specialized networks for all sorts of different tasks, like the language network that we've been talking about.
Right. The language zone. But what are some of the other key networks that have evolved alongside language?
Okay, well, there's the multiple demand network.
Multiple demand.
It's like our brain's all-purpose task force.
Okay.
It jumps into action when we need to solve problems, when we're juggling information in our working memory, trying to control our impulses.
So that's what helps me remember a phone number while I'm also trying to figure out what to make for dinner.
Exactly.
Got it. It's a busy one.
It's a busy network for sure. Then we have the theory of mind network.
Yeah.
And that one is all about understanding other people. It helps us figure out what someone else is thinking or feeling,
Right.
why they're acting a certain way, even predict what they might do next.
Whoa. So that's like my social brain at work. No wonder it gets tired sometimes.
Oh, for sure. Navigating the social world is a complex thing. And then you have the default
Or
network.
the default network.
And that's more about our internal world.
Oh, okay.
It's active when we're daydreaming, reminiscing, just letting our mind wander.
So it's like my brain is on screensaver, but it's still processing in the background.
Kind of, yeah. It's busy making connections between ideas, consolidating memories, even coming up with creative solutions.
Wow. So our brains are doing all this even when we're just chilling out.
It seems that way.
No wonder naps are so restorative.
That's right. And here's a really fascinating thing. At least some of these networks,
Yeah?
they have counterparts in other animals' brains.
Really? So other animals have these complex thinking networks too?
To some degree, yes. We share a lot of fundamental cognitive abilities with other species.
Interesting.
But the difference is in the level of complexity and sophistication, you know? Our brains have just evolved to handle more intricate tasks and make more nuanced connections.
So it's not like we're the only ones with these brain tools,
Yeah.
but ours are like the top of the line models.
That's a great way to put it. And it's important to note that these different brain networks, including the language network, it seems like they evolved in parallel.
Okay.
And that suggests that language isn't necessarily driving our cognitive evolution, but rather it's a product of it.
So instead of language shapes thought, it's more like thought shapes language.
Exactly. Language evolved alongside our other cognitive abilities as a reflection of this growing capacity for abstract thought, social complexity, problem solving.
It's kind of humbling in a way, you know?
Yeah.
We like to think that language is what makes us special, but it might just be a fancy way to express the thinking that we are already capable of.
It is a shift in perspective, for sure, and it opens up new avenues for research, too. Now that we're kind of moving away from this language-centric view of cognition,
Right.
we can start to explore those other systems that might play even bigger roles in human intelligence.
That's really interesting. Now, we've been talking a lot about the efficiency of language.
Yeah.
But isn't there also a lot of ambiguity in language?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that kind of go against the whole idea that it's designed for clear communication?
It's a great point. And ambiguity, where words or sentences can have multiple meanings,
Right.
that has been a bit of a puzzle for researchers.
I can see why. If language was truly meant to be clear, it seems like there wouldn't be so much room for interpretation.
Right. And for a long time, people used that ambiguity to argue that language was more about shaping thought than communicating clearly. Like they saw it as a design flaw.
So ambiguity was like a glitch in the system.
Yeah, that was the thinking. But more recently, research has actually kind of flipped that idea on its head.
Okay.
It turns out ambiguity might actually be a feature, not a bug.
Wait a minute. How can having multiple meanings be a good thing?
Well, for one thing, it makes communication more efficient.
Really?
Think about the word bank.
Okay.
It could refer to a financial institution, or it could be the edge of a river.
Right.
But in most situations, it's pretty obvious from the context which meaning is intended. We don't have to say riverbank every single time.
So ambiguity helps us to be more concise. It's like a mental shorthand.
Exactly. And that's incredibly valuable, especially in spoken language where we don't have a lot of time and processing power.
It's like using abbreviations when you're texting to save time.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And beyond efficiency, ambiguity actually makes language more expressive and creative.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Well, think about poetry, song lyrics, even everyday jokes.
Okay.
We often use words with multiple meanings to create puns, metaphors, and other figures of speech that add these layers of meaning and make language more interesting.
So instead of limiting us, ambiguity actually gives us more flexibility to play with language.
Exactly. It adds nuance and depth that wouldn't be possible if every word just had one single fixed meaning. It's like ambiguity gives language a little bit of wiggle room,
Okay.
so it can adapt to different situations and express this wider range of thoughts and feelings.
So it's really a reflection of how complex our thoughts and experiences really are.
Precisely. It lets language capture those multiple perspectives and interpretations that exist in the real world.
This is blowing my mind. So instead of being a flaw, ambiguity is actually a key part of what makes language so powerful.
Exactly. It's a testament to the adaptability of language. It's always evolving to meet our communication needs.
You know, it's amazing to think how much we just, take language for granted.
Yeah.
We use it every single day,
Yeah.
but I don't think we often stop and consider
Yeah.
how it actually works.
That's true, and how it evolved.
Yeah, and, the more we dig into this stuff, the more we realize how much we actually don't know. there are so many questions still out there.
Oh, tons. So many mysteries.
So, like, what are some of the big ones? Like, what are researchers really grappling with right now when it comes to language?
Well, one of the big ones is how that language network we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
how it actually develops in the brain.
Right.
Like, how do babies, young children, how do they pick up language so quickly and seemingly effortlessly? What's happening in their brains? What are the neural processes that make that possible?
It's incredible, isn't it? It really is mind-blowing how fast kids can just absorb language.
Yeah, they're like little sponges. And researchers are actually using these really advanced brain imaging techniques to study these changes as they're happening,
Oh, wow.
trying to zero in on the exact areas and the networks involved in language acquisition.
So they can, like, watch the language zone being built in real time.
Pretty much. And this research is huge, not just for understanding how language develops, but also for addressing things like language disorders and learning disabilities.
Oh, of course, yeah.
If we can understand how the system works,
Right.
we might be able to find better ways to help people who struggle with language.
Yeah, that's an amazing thought, to be able to use this knowledge to help people communicate more effectively.
Absolutely. Another area that researchers are really fascinated by is the neural basis of meaning.
Okay.
Like, how are words and concepts actually represented in the brain? How do we connect those abstract symbols to real-world objects and experiences?
That's a tough one. That's a deep question.
Yeah, it's like trying to figure out how our brains create their own internal dictionaries.
Yeah.
And so researchers are using brain imaging and combining it with computational modeling and behavioral studies to try to crack this code.
Wow. So it's like linguistics meets neuroscience meets computer science.
Yeah, exactly. It's this really interdisciplinary field, bringing people from all sorts of backgrounds together to try to understand language and the mind.
This has been a real eye-opener for me, I'm starting to see language as more than just a way to communicate.
Yeah.
It's like this incredible window into how our brains work.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this field so fascinating. Language is such a core part of what makes us human.
Mhm.
And by studying it, we're basically studying ourselves,
Right.
our minds, our capacity for thought, for creativity, for connection.
Yeah, it's like this incredible journey of self-discovery guided by the very words that we use to express who we are.
Beautifully put. And, as we keep going on this journey of trying to understand language, we're bound to encounter even more surprises,
For sure.
more challenges, and ultimately even more profound insights into the nature of human thought.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've gone from the language network in our brains to the subtle ways ambiguity shapes how we communicate, and it's clear that language is much more than just words.
It really is.
It's this reflection of our shared humanity, this
Mhm.
ability to connect, to create, and to understand the world around us.
Yeah, I love that.
So to all of our listeners out there, keep exploring this stuff. Keep asking questions, and just keep marveling at the extraordinary power of language.
It's a gift, it's a tool, it's a mystery, and it's this endless source of fascination. Who knows what we'll discover as we keep trying to unravel its secrets.
Well, that's a wrap for this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed the journey as much as we have.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
And we hope you'll join us again soon for another adventure in the world of knowledge and ideas. Until then, stay curious and keep those conversations flowing.